Equal status gave guitar players the opportunity to form their own style. West developed his trademark from a technique first credited to Belgian gypsy jazz man Django Reinhardt.
He used these things we know today as octaves, which were introduced many years ago, probably by Django Reinhardt, who played them very wildly, you know, sporadically throughout his playing. But Montgomery really made something of these octaves. He played them very warmly, very subtle, and he used them to play melodies which really strengthened the melodies, much like an orchestra who allows the violin to play on the top and the cellos would play the same thing underneath and create a very nice warm sound, you know.
Octaves are created by playing two notes at the same time, one scale or musical register apart.
Well, the octaves are when you get two notes separated, you know, I mean, from one do to high do, really, you know, and it just gives more emphasis, really, as opposed to playing, you've got... So it really kind of, I guess it's a way when you play with your thumb of making a more kind of projecting kind of sound, so that, as opposed to just playing a single, you know. It gives it much more emphasis and helps to cut through the rest of the band. He was able to play octave solos at great tempo, you know, and really, and it was no bother for him. I mean, most guys really struggle playing octaves at fast tempo, but Wes didn't.
Montgomery's octave playing was very dominant, and it was the most identifiable thing. When you heard it, you said, oh, that's Montgomery. But his single line was very attractive to jazz players who were always looking for something, you know, fresh, something from a different point of view.
Playing a single line or one note at a time made the guitar sound like a saxophone. Sax players have been very influential in jazz, and many other musicians have copied them. One of the most imitated was Charlie Parker, who was one of the inventors of the jazz style, bebop.
Well, all the musicians, after hearing Charlie Parker, you know, they just got hooked to the conception, you know, that he created, you know, the bebop, the whole bebop thing, the way the lines flowed. Wes was trying to make his guitar sound like a saxophone, you know, Charlie Parker type things. The quest of all jazz musicians is to sound as an individual on the instrument. So if you copy instruments other than your own, then it gives you a fresh approach to your, you know, your own thing, because the timbre of your instrument will be different from the one that you copied.
Based in Indianapolis, Wes was able to keep up with the latest jazz trends from the musicians on tour. Tours helped to spread jazz across America. Wes hated flying and was forced to tour by car. He preferred to develop his style as a part-time player in Indianapolis. His growing reputation meant touring musicians traveled to him to catch his trend-setting, homegrown approach to the guitar.
I think his approach was to try and really imitate what was happening in the jazz quintet, which was probably the kind of archetypal jazz group of the 50s and 60s. And that would be the single string, which is like the horn soloist, you know. And then you have the octave thing, which is like the front line, saxophone and trumpet playing together. You know, so you get that impact of the two instruments playing together. And then there were the chord solos, which was really almost an imitation of the piano player, what he would do. So that's more the kind of thing you would hear from a piano player, really, with a moving melody and the chords underneath it. So I think he was really doing on the guitar almost everything that was happening in a band.
Playing jazz part-time couldn't support Wes and his family of 6 children. He held down a factory job from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. Wes would start playing at a jazz club from 9 until midnight or later. He would then head across town to an after-hours gig from 2:30 until dawn, ready to start his factory day again. But Wes's reputation reached New York record producer Orrin Keepnews.
I was so convinced that within a matter of days I flew out to Indianapolis, spent an evening listening to Wes and his regular evening job, and then after a slight pause, he went on to his after-hours club. He finished work at 6 o'clock in the morning. I had been listening to him since about 9 o'clock the night before, and I do treasure, as I say, the melodrama of, the positive melodrama of that moment, but he literally, signed a standard union form contract as dawn broke over the Midwest.
The contract allowed Wes to start a successful but tragically short career that would cause controversy in the jazz world. It was 1960, his first year with Riverside Records. Wes was the darling of the jazz press. He won the Best Newcomer in Jazz magazine Downbeat, second place in a Metronome Readers Poll, and Most Promising Jazz Instrumentalist of the Year in Billboard. This tune, West Coast Blues, appeared on his second album for Riverside, which received the maximum 5 stars in a Downbeat review.
After his first year, we had a conversation which consisted of the fact that he was a new star, in Downbeat. He was getting wonderful critical approval. Everybody was making a fuss over him. And I said to him very specifically, because he was complaining about the fact that he still was making very little money. And I said, Wes, a year ago, you were a bum and broke. Now you're a star and broke. That's real progress.
Riverside Records fell into financial difficulties and folded in 1964. Wes switched to Verve Records with new producer Creed Taylor. Taylor saw no point in being a star and being broke. He saw the financial potential for Wes in the popular market in an era when jazz was going through a bad time.
Well, you see, because of the advent of rock and roll, so my time, jazz became unpopular. It was far more popular, say, in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Big band, Sinatra, Capitol, that stuff, Nat King Cole. And that was the pop music of its day. But then this style called free jazz came in, and the critics embraced it as the new thing.
Most free jazz players' techniques of improvisation took the music a long way from recognizable songs or tunes. It's a difficult sound to sell.
Free jazz didn't leave any room for the listener. It was just basically musicians being very self-indulgent, and for me, not really giving anything to the audience. So as a result, jazz clubs were closing down. A lot of jazz musicians went into semi-retirement. And so Wes, as a family man with 8 mouths to feed, plus 9 himself, he had to do something. And so he tapped into this market thanks to the likes of Creed Taylor. And they started doing popular songs in a jazz kind of way.
Creed Taylor wanted Wes to record an instrumental version of a hip-hop song, Going Out of My Head. The lyrics told the story of a young man's broken heart. At first, Wes was reluctant to record the tune, but Taylor convinced him. Wes's version of Going Out of My Head was a major hit, brought him financial rewards, and changed his career.
Creed Taylor, who produced Montgomery's most successful records, Going Out of My Head and Bumping on the Sunset and things like that, and actually made him a star. It made the Montgomery name a household name in its day.
Pressure was put on Wes to reproduce the success of the record. In nightclubs, he still played his jazz style. But on recordings, Creed Taylor insisted that Wes play music suited to the easy listening market. Die-hard jazz fans grieved at what they believed was happening to Wes's talent.
Essentially what happened was that wonderful sound of his, and that wonderful warmth, and that incredible lyricism of his was developed in a way that, if we look on this in terms of success, and we look on this in terms of reaching a large audience, yes, incredibly successful. A lot of money was made, a lot of people were pleasured by listening to this music, but in terms of the artistry of the man, by those tough and sometimes perhaps irrational standards that we in the jazz world apply to music, Wes was not remaining true to himself, was not remaining true to his art.
His popularity as a pop player was due to his incredible flexibility. He was a man who could play ballads better than most. He could play up-tempo songs, Going Out of My Head, better than most. You know, he could play a beautiful R&B tune better than most. That's called flexibility, not giving up or selling out. When a person is flexible, that doesn't mean that he's no good.
Well, I'm talking jazz critics, you know. A lot of them old musicians, producers, writers, who, to be honest, never quite got past first base. And so, because they never made it, it instills this bitterness within them. And so when someone's trying to make it, or trying to make a dime, I mean, they forget that it's a business we're in, you know.
Well, Montgomery and myself had the opportunity to work with Creed Taylor. I saw my credibility elevated, you know, in the eyes of common people especially. Jazz critics didn't like it, you know, because they felt I was being led down the same path that Montgomery was, and I was beginning to suffer that same kind of criticism. It didn't bother me, though, because you can't have everything, I realized, you know. After playing in clubs and closing clubs, because there'd be 5 people in the place, you know, on a Saturday night, 5 people, you can't keep your doors open, you know. But when those records started getting popular, the clubs filled up. And so you got a choice. Make the critics happy or fill up the clubs, make the people happy, you know?
This was one of Wes's most popular hits, Windy. In 1967, it reached number 44 in the pop chart and number 10 in the easy listening countdown.
The matter is, it's only those backgrounds that I can't stand. Wes is still playing wonderfully well on those records that he made for Creed Taylor. Wes still sounds gorgeous on those, and always did. I just wish it could have been better. I wish that, and I know that he could have used the strength that he had to make more of an intelligent compromise there. In other words, if Wes had reached a point where he wasn't selling hundreds of thousands of records, but was maybe selling, you know, real good for a jazz artist, was selling 50 or 60,000, he would have made enough money to be able to take care of his family and still could have produced records that would be appreciated.
I mean, I think what you try and do is you try and find a positive way of using what you have in a way that's accessible to the biggest amount of people that you can. I mean, if you have say you have a hit record doing a particular type of thing, that's what they want to hear over and over, you know, and is a kind of trap.
The business trap had sprung on Wes. Not only was he under pressure from the critics, but his popularity meant he had to maintain a tough schedule of touring and recording. At 45, while recording his 23rd album, he died of a heart attack.
When I talk about what happened to Wes, I am talking from an extremely prejudiced point of view. And I still feel that sense of prejudice. It was many years ago, and Wes died in 1968, and I still rather irrationally, perhaps, feel that his quite early death was in part due to the tremendous emotional strain that I know he was under as a result of recording that he himself did not feel comfortable with, that he himself did not feel was being true to his art.
What Wes was doing was introducing jazz very subtly to a market that wouldn't give a damn about the likes of Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker. I'm talking to a younger audience, and people responded to that. And, you know, no matter what the critics said, the public decided, and they bought that stuff in droves. It sold like hotcakes, you know, and all credit to Wes. He opened that whole market up.
Wes once said, "Don't worry what the music is called. Worry whether it pleases people. People are the final judges." This is Wes Montgomery's legacy.